being a very demanding kitty tonight.
All right, for those just joining us, we're just waiting a few minutes before we get started with our guest this evening, just allowing a number of people to join, as I know there are, and I see you all popping on here. So we will be with you in just a moment. All right. So watching the streams, I think we have a few people joining us already. Good evening and welcome to the Virtual Cantina Network Speaker Series 2021 for the fall. Thank you all for joining us. Before we get to it, to introduce our guest, let me introduce our host for the evening, Mr. Jonathan Notman, who has been doing a whole lot of work. He will be our primary host, and he is the gentleman in charge of our speaker series and has done such a phenomenal job, and we really enjoy it. And so without any further ado, Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our guests, and we'll get started this evening.
Yeah, thank you, David. That's a wonderful introduction. So, as you know, we are in the autumn 2021 Virtual Cantina Speaker Series. This is episode 4. And we have a wonderful guest that's agreed to chat with us this evening and allowing us some time to get to know him a little bit better. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Craig Miller. Craig, how are you this evening?
I'm fine, Jonathan. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, Craig is a gentleman that I actually met at Empire Con in Los Angeles a few years ago, and I was very intrigued by his panel, what he actually had to say at that event. And he actually was a guest at a guest spot at our Force Fest 2020 collaboration last year, which was a wonderful event. And I know that Craig had some amazing stories to tell us all about, which was enthralling. So I'm glad that he's agreed to speak to us this evening, and just to get to know him a little bit better, and a bit of a trip down memory lane for him. So we have a lot of members, Craig, that have heard a little bit about you, but really want to get to know you a little bit better and about your work and your life, and particularly your career with Lucasfilm. So let me introduce you a little bit more than I have already. So a little bit of a run through of Craig's career. He's an American writer-producer with over 200 film and television credits. His work has mainly been in live action, animation, and character designs. He's worked in publicity, marketing, and licensing for Lucasfilm, Warner Brothers, Universal, Disney, Columbia, Henson Associates, and others. Craig is predominantly known as Director of Fan Relations for Lucasfilm, which it was a role he undertook between 1977 and 1980. And he was tasked with creating a fan buzz for the movie series in the absence of social media. I can't imagine how that difficult a job that was without social media, but we'll talk about that in a minute. He created and oversaw the official Star Wars fan club, as well as having edited and written all the first 2 years of Bantha Tracks, which was the official Star Wars club newsletter. He was the producer of the Star Wars Sesame Street episodes, in addition to operating R2-D2 in some of the episodes. He was also the producer for Lucasfilm commercials such as Underoos, etc. Craig has a background in animation. Apart from his work with Lucasfilm, he has background in animation, including his work with Smurfs, Beast Wars, The Real Ghostbusters, and his 104-episode TV series Pocket Dragon Adventures was a finalist for the Humanitas Prize. Craig has served as a writer for 3 years on the PBS Emmy Award-winning series Curious George, which my son is absolutely blown away by. He loves that series. Aside from that, Craig is a member of the Writers Guild of America, the Writers Guild of Canada, and the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, where he has been an Emmy judge for several years. He serves on the steering committee for Women in Animation, Los Angeles, and has been a judge for the Annie Awards. Wow, what an incredible career, Craig. We could talk all night about what you've done. That is just an amazing, amazing, amazing just run through of your resume, if you like, and your career to date. So we're just so intrigued and glad that you agreed to speak with us this evening. So, so getting into the questions, if I may, Craig. So you're a native Californian. You grew up in LA.
Yep.
And I understand you were somewhat of a science fiction fanatic when you were growing up. When you were a kid, you loved science fiction. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your favorite early books or TV series or movies? I love Flash Gordon. That was my thing. Larry Buster Crabbe. Tell me about what you loved in science fiction growing up as a kid.
Well, it was, I was growing up in Los Angeles in the 60s. So, on TV was Star Trek and Lost in Space. It always amazes me. I remember when I was a kid, we would, if there was something with science fiction on it, we would watch it no matter how terrible it was, because it was the only stuff with science fiction. Now there's so much science fiction on TV. It's like, oh yeah, I don't like that show. I'll watch this other show. There's just a tremendous amount of science fiction out now. But I read Heinlein, Bradbury, the magazines, all that kind of stuff. I watched. I was a little kid, so I didn't go out to movies unless my parents wanted to go, and my parents did not go to science fiction movies, but there were a lot of them on television, so I could watch them on television. And when I was 13 years old, I wrote a letter to Ray Bradbury, who lived here in LA in the same part of town I lived in. And he invited me to come to his office one day to talk to him. And I did. He told me that he could spare half an hour. We ended up speaking for over 2 hours. And he told me about a local science fiction club called the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society, which he had been a member of when he was a teenager. And while he didn't attend regularly anymore, it still met. And he suggested I go join that, which I did. And that kind of led to the rest of my life. I got active in science fiction fandom and comics fandom. And because of that, I ended up working as a consultant on Star Wars prior to the release, because Charlie Lippincott wanted to market Star Wars to fans because there wasn't really much else to market at that time. And fans were clearly a target audience for it. So I got hired as a consultant and then eventually got hired full time, and that led to the rest of my career.
That's really interesting. That resonates with me. Growing up in the United Kingdom, the 70s and 80s, and looking back at, my tiny little 12-inch black and white TV and watching all the old science fiction movies and series, from the US and the UK, I totally get that, why you were hooked on that. It's interesting you mentioned, being interested in science fiction and then getting hired in a consultancy role, for publicity for Lucasfilm. I said earlier on, you were hired to create the buzz around the original movie. Do you think that was somewhat related to some of the popularity levels of science fiction back then? Because science fiction wasn't popular. It wasn't sexy. It was just,
it wasn't popular at all.
Yeah.
There was, 2001 and 1968, Silent Running, the first Planet of the Apes movie were kind of A-level movies, but most science fiction was more around the Roger Corman level or worse. Rogers were at least mostly earnest and well-made. But, it was not a popular genre. And that's one of the reasons there was a lot of skepticism about the possible success of Star Wars, is because nobody thought science fiction would work. Fox now famously did market surveys, and they went to Hollywood Boulevard and said, here's a list of different genres of movies: comedy, romance, war movies, science fiction, et cetera, et cetera. Science fiction was down at the bottom in terms of what kind of movie would you like to see. They also tested the title Star Wars, and because no one was thinking of science fiction, and because we were still in Vietnam, people were thinking it was some kind of actual contemporary war movie. And so that title was bad in terms of how it turned out in the polling. And the market research department told the executives at Fox, don't make this movie, it's science fiction. No one wants to see science fiction. And if you do make it, change the title. No one will go see a movie with war in the title. So that was the, general attitude about science fiction. And that's why we were making a point of marketing it to science fiction, comics, and other genre fans to make sure they got to the theater. Because, when we went, when we went to science fiction and comic conventions in 1976 to promote the movie, even at audiences of science fiction fans, going into our program, the attitude was, what's this next terrible science fiction movie that's going to come out? And, they were kind of, the people who came in thinking it was going to be bad, that they were going to be laughing at it. But by the end of the presentations, the general response was, wow, this looks great. And if they can really pull it off, it'll be terrific. We were able to convince them with the visuals and everything we were telling them about it. But the attitude, even among science fiction fans, was negative at that time period. It's not like today where almost everything is science fiction or superheroes.
Got it. So in a way, as groundbreaking as a movie Star Wars was for its time, you could say your role was groundbreaking, right? It was creating a buzz, creating that positive energy around a movie that they were concerned might not be popular. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's fair. Charlie Lippincott was the head of publicity, advertising, promotion, and licensing for what was then called the Star Wars Corporation. And it was his idea to go and try to market directly to fans, to build the base there. Because there were the way you marketed movies back then, before Charlie really, to a great extent, reinvented movie marketing, was you got early reviews, you got your big name actors on talk shows, or as you in England, you would say chat shows. That was pretty much it. You would occasionally be able to get a magazine to write an article, do a feature story, that sort of thing. But there were no stars in Star Wars that an American TV show, an American talk show, would book on the air. Peter Cushing and Alec Guinness, of course, were very well known, but they were much better known in England. In America, they were mostly known for either horror films with Cushing and quirky foreign comedies by the general American audience. They weren't going to be booked on the Johnny Carson show. And Mark, Carey, and Harrison were completely unknown. So that was out. Science fiction was anathema. So let's go to the people who like science fiction. Let's build on that. That was Charlie's idea, and he brought me in to help him with that.
That's a fantastic insight. I don't know if it was by design. We've talked about the publicity levels of the original movie, the Star Wars, in Europe and the US. And I've said this, I've relayed this story many times to our members. You know, growing up in the UK, the original Star Wars movie, when it was originally or about to be released, they only really ever showed 3 parts of the movie of very small sequences, which was the capture of R2-D2 on Tatooine by the Jawas, the TIE fighter attack on the Millennium Falcon after it escapes from the Death Star, as well as the sequence where it escapes from Mos Eisley. Now, I don't know if that was by design or deliberate, but that little tiny trailers that were not more than 30 seconds long really drew you in. There wasn't as much marketing or publicity or toy sales or T-shirts or anything. It was just those 3 things. But I remember watching those as an 8-year-old and thinking, goodness, that is something I've never seen before. And I think for me, living in the UK and particularly us in Europe, that really drew us into the movie even more, wanting to know more about what this was.
Yeah, you know, today movies are released virtually simultaneously all over the world. Frequently now in Europe before they're released here on occasion. But back then that was very unusual. The vast majority of the income came from the domestic US box office. And films were released over a greater period of time. And as I recall, well, the movie came out, Star Wars came out May 25th, 1980 in the US. And I think in London, it came out in December, was it? November or December? And then spread over the next several weeks through the rest of England or the rest of the UK. But it wasn't until November or December that it got to London at all. So the marketing was not handled through our office, but we saw a great deal of it. But because it was being done so late, of course, it was we deferred as to what we were showing in the international market. And licensing was very small before Star Wars came out. We only had, I think, 4 licensees. Marvel for the comics, Ballantine for the novelization, Factors, etc. for posters and keychains and T-shirts, and Kenner for the toys. The toys didn't come out really until January. With the amazing marketing idea of just selling a piece of cardboard with pictures of toys on it for Christmas. And those were yes, exactly. It was someone at Kenner who came up with that idea to sell people pictures of toys and a promise that you'll get them real soon now.
And it worked.
And it worked. And it worked. Star Wars, you know, even then licensing was not a big deal. I mean, everyone knows the story about George being able to get the licensing rights on Star Wars and to control licensing because no one cared about licensing. Licensing was not a significant income factor. After Star Wars, no studio ever gave that right away again because it turned out to be so much. So, I mean, it was something no one was really considering it. So, and then, of course, had to eventually get Pally Toys to do the toy deal. Kenner had the master license. So Pally Toys actually made the deal with Kenner for the UK rights. That sort of thing. And now I think there are 947,000 licensees. Sorry, that's a cat going by. But back then there were just a handful and it was hard to get them.
You know, one of the things I remember prior to Star Wars merchandise, the biggest movie merchandise seller just before Star Wars was Jaws. A lot of Jaws toys and T-shirts. I can remember that very, very well. So, Craig, fast forward a little bit. So you were a consultant for the original Star Wars movie, and then you were hired full time into the role of director of fan relations, and you then kind of were committed to Lucasfilm, and then with the release of Empire Strikes Back, we've got a wonderful picture I want to share of Craig on the set of Echo Base with a Millennium Falcon. And that was at a visit to London, I believe, in 1980. Is that correct?
Oh no, this was in 1979. Of course, while we were shooting, I'd come over. I made 2 trips over during production, one for a week and one for 3 weeks, working on the film, doing interviews, going through photos. We did a thing at the World Science Fiction Convention travels to different locations every year. And that year it happened to be in Brighton, England. So we arranged to do a special thing at Brighton. We got a small function room, actually a suite of 3 rooms, that we filled with costumes and photos and set miniatures, and all kinds of McQuarrie paintings, all kinds of things. So we had that on display throughout the 4 days of the convention. And then Gary and I, Gary Kurtz, the producer of Star Wars and Empire, we did a slideshow presentation on Empire during the convention at Brighton. So I was over for that as well.
That's great. And here's a wonderful picture of you, Gary, Irv Kirshner, on the same set, I believe, in London.
Yeah, same set, different angle, of course. Between Gary and Kirsch is my assistant, Mark Marshall.
Got it. And so, can you? I mean, I wanted to actually talk to you about the Brighton convention in a second, but can you tell us a little bit about some of your memories of actually visiting the sets that were built in London? Some personal memories.
Well, it's a combination of excitement, amazement, and boredom. Anyone who's actually been on a movie set, if you're not working, if you're not setting up a light or doing something on the production, there's a lot of sitting and waiting while other people are busy doing things. But even with that, I mean, it's just amazing to see all of that material, everything going on. While I was there, we had obviously the ice cave. We had Dagobah set up. We had the carbon freeze chamber. I was in all those locations. The sets that we had built. Dagobah was actually built in the ice cave. And working with a lot of people. Obviously, there's Billy D. He was on set, even though his character has no scenes in the ice cave. That's where everyone was while we were shooting, and he was on at the studio that day for a costume test. So he came in and was hanging around for a while, and he and I were chatting. Back then, we didn't have cameras in our pockets that we all carried around with us 24 hours a day. So you don't see a lot of photos of people from that period. And of course, on movie sets, and photography is not allowed. The only people allowed to take photos on the Empire sets and stages were our unit photographer, and Gary Kurtz also took photos. Gary took a lot of photos. And so any photos that I'm in, for example, are because the unit photographer or Gary decided I was, he had nothing better to take a picture of and took a picture of me, or got, people together and took their pictures. We had an enormously large number of photos taken during production. Lots and lots of black and white and lots of color slides. I know that I personally carried from London to Los Angeles 10,000 color slides.
Wow.
When I came back at the end of production, because you don't want to ship them, and you don't want to pack them as luggage, because slides are originals. There's no duplicates, so you don't want them to get lost. Security was a lot different back then, so I could carry a lot of hand luggage onto the plane, and bring it back to LA. But that wasn't even all of the color slides, let alone the black and white.
I can imagine you had a little bit different kind of security to worry about, not the airline security, but keeping those set photos, secretive to not give away any spoilers for the movie.
Well, yes and no. I mean, certainly carrying it home, no one knew who I was. I was just flying on a commercial flight from London. Nothing was labeled, Star Wars, look in here. So I was just some guy with a whole bunch of hand luggage filling up the overheads. So that there was no real security worry in that regard. Worried that something might get lost, but not otherwise. We did have worries about stuff getting out, in general. And that's why, for example, when Gary and I did that slideshow, and I did a lot of slideshows at science fiction and comic conventions, it was very carefully planned as to what we were willing to tell people about, what we weren't willing to tell people. We didn't show anyone Yoda because that had to be a surprise during the film, or when people saw the film. But we did let people know there was an ice planet, so we could show pictures of that. In fact, the very first photo we released was Luke on a Tauntaun. And the whole purpose of that was to give an indication that there was a whole different world that you'd be seeing, at least one, and more weird alien creatures. We wanted to give people a sense it wasn't going to be just the same stuff. It was going to be all more and different.
It was interesting what you were saying a few minutes ago, Craig, about being present on sets. It's excitement, the buzz, boredom, tedium, etc. We were talking to a few weeks ago to one of the Steel Freebond's production members, and he said exactly the same thing. You kind of boredom, tedium, waiting around, and it's all rush. But he said we actually filled some of the boredom with pranks. We used to prank him. I remember him telling us a story about nailing one of the assistants' feet to the floor prior to Gary Kurtz and George Lucas walking in on an unwanted visit. So, but just a wonderful memory that. So, anyway, so Craig, what I was interested, you were talking about visiting the World Science Fiction Convention in Brighton. So, tell us a little bit about the difference, having to work hard to kind of promote the original Star Wars movie, science fiction not being that popular, to then what was the buzz around, the Star Wars 2, The Empire Strikes Back? Did you notice a kind of different vibe of the movie?
Yeah. I mean, Star Wars was very difficult to promote, to sell people on going to. Empire was not that difficult. Because among other things, it was a known commodity. People knew that they had enjoyed Star Wars. Even people who continued to say, I don't like science fiction, but I like Star Wars, but we weren't complacent about it. We knew that we had to make sure people knew about it, were ready for it, continued to be excited about it. You know, we didn't take it for granted that they would just flock back to theaters. And so we handled the marketing of it just the way as if it was a brand new movie, doing all the things we could to try to keep people interested in Star Wars. It was 3 years between movies. And to get them excited about going. That's why we did things like putting R2 and 3PO on Sesame Street. We didn't go to the UK, but here in the States, we did these 800 phone numbers where you could call up and get a message from Luke or Leia, Darth Vader, Han Solo, C-3PO. I think there were 5, yeah.
One of our members, Mike, had just asked a question about that earlier. He says he has fond memories of those 800 numbers, and was asking, I think I know the answer to this, are any of those still accessible? How long did that go on?
Well, I mean, they originally they played from mid-January through the release of Empire. And today, you know, the world is different in many ways. One of them is computers. Back then, almost all telephone switching was mechanical. You know, we wanted a particular phone number, 800-521-1980, May 21st, 1980.
For the release of Empire Strikes Back.
Release of The Empire Strikes Back. So, but to have that phone number, you had to have your phone lines in, as it turned out, Illinois, because that's where the 800-521 switching equipment was. So we had to set up the phone system there. And you got it today, you could just have a computer randomly give you whichever, a message, and it would be different every time you called in because it was randomly assigning the message you played. Back then, that wasn't possible. These were actually on tape. And so in January, you heard C-3PO. In February, you heard the message from Luke Skywalker, etc. And so you had to call, and the messages ended, call next month for new message. But it was great. We had, I wrote and produced those. We had a lot of fun recording them. All of the actors recorded their own, did their own voices for them. And they were very, very popular to the point of actually shutting down the 800 phone system for the state of Illinois because so many people were calling, it completely overwhelmed the system. They couldn't process the number of calls coming in. Remember, it's all mechanical switching. So there were so many calls coming in, they couldn't give them all busy signals. They could just not even respond to them. And we hadn't done any advertising. I had announced it at a couple of conventions, and Starlog had run a little squib, a little box on one page about them. And that was enough to get the system shut down. And AT&T, which was the phone company back then, it was the only phone company really, insisted they wanted us to cancel everything, which we refused to. We had a contract. They insisted we cease all advertising, which was easy. We had done none and had planned none. They wanted us to add more phone lines to handle the volume, which we did. We had a company in Illinois, and they just added more lines to our service. And they wanted us to apologize publicly because they didn't want their customers pissed off at them that they had somehow screwed up and, by the way, might owe their customers money. So they wanted us to apologize. So I was really only too happy to write a press release and send it out to every news outlet in the world saying Star Wars is so popular, people can't wait to find out anything about the next movie, which is coming out in 5 months. So we apologize for all that popularity, and we're sorry it shut down the phone system, but it's all fixed, so you could call now. So we had, publicity we could not have paid for, and even more people calling up. As to whether you can hear them now, you can find them on YouTube. I had found, this is a few years ago now, a copy of a cassette tape of my copy of the recorded messages, and I posted them on my Facebook page, and it went viral to the point where Entertainment Weekly wrote up about them and had them linked to their webpage, and other people eventually put them onto YouTube. So you can find all of them on YouTube.
Very cool.
So it's fair.
So it's fair to looking those up.
So it's fair to say that The Empire Strikes Back brought down part of the AT&T 800 network.
Absolutely, it completely did, at least for the state of Illinois.
That's amazing. So, Craig. So, before we kind of jump into the next part of your career, I wanted to talk a little bit about your work with the Star Wars Sesame Street series, etc. But before we do that, I hear that you have a very interesting story about the Arc of Boba Fett. So Boba Fett, as we all know, right, was responsible for transporting Han Solo off Bespin while he's in carbon freeze. And we understand that, we all know what happened in the Return of the Jedi, or Revenge of the Jedi, as it was known in production. And that Boba Fett was due to play a bigger character than he did in the third movie. Tell us a little bit about what you knew to be, what was being planned for that character.
Well, yeah, remember, George was originally going to make these 3 trilogies relatively quickly, one on top of the other. And the plan was for the third trilogy to be the completion of Darth Vader's arc, the bringing him back to the light side, to overcoming the Emperor. All of that was going to be in the third trilogy. The third movie, the movie that ended up being Return of the Jedi, Boba Fett was going to be the big bad guy in that episode, and at least part of it was going to be about retrieving Han Solo. And remember, when we made Empire, it was unclear whether Harrison would be returning for Jedi. He had not yet signed a contract for the third movie. So freezing Han Solo in carbonite was insurance. If Harrison doesn't come back, he never gets defrosted. If he does come back, he does. But originally, he was going to be in the hands of Boba Fett through much of the movie. Boba Fett was going to be the big bad guy, and that was going to be the plot of that third movie. Then George decided during post-production on Empire that he didn't want to continue beyond the third movie. He was going to stop. He wasn't going to make the next trilogy. And so that meant he had to go to compress the redemption of Darth Vader and the overthrowing of the Emperor into the third movie, which meant there was no room for Boba Fett, which is why Boba gets set up in the end of Empire, and basically very quickly, 10 minutes, 15 minutes into Jedi, someone bumps into him and knocks him overboard and into the mouth of a waiting monster, because he needed to be gotten out of the way so that the redemption could happen. So that was a completely different, unfortunately for Boba Fett, although he has since become a fan favorite, and Mandalorian and everything else. But he really only ends up on screen in the two movies for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes between the two movies. Has 3 lines of dialogue, but he was supposed to be the main villain in Jedi.
Right. It's interesting. You should mention that. And I love that story. I remember, and we'll talk more about Bantha tracks, etc. But I remember receiving, when I joined, a newsletter about Boba Fett, and it broke him down as an individual character, his suit and his helmet and what it meant and everything. And for him to reach such an early demise, as you mentioned, in that third movie, was a bit of a disappointment. And I think you're right. He's probably one of the most revered Star Wars characters, of all time amongst the others that we have. So, it was interesting that George took that route. So, but I thought that was fascinating. I'd never heard about that before until you'd actually mentioned that. So that, thank you for that. So, again, now, going on to what your promotion, if you like, of The Empire Strikes Back and the Star Wars movies generally. You worked with Sesame Street on the kind of Star Wars series, if you like, of the Sesame Street episodes, and I know that you were responsible for working with R2-D2 on those particular sequences. But and I know you've told this story a few times, and I'm sure our members would be delighted to hear it. I hear that you had quite an influence on Tony Daniels being able to appear in those series, and a little mishap that happened with his working visa. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we had set this all up. I had contacted Sesame Street. Back then they were operated as Children's Television Workshop, about having R2 and 3PO on, and they thought it was a great idea. They loved it. We worked it out. They wrote all the scripts and sent them to me for approval, and I had to have them. All of them were fine. I mean, we're not very controlling. It's that the Star Wars-ness of it has to be maintained. You don't have characters do things that are out of character. And they wanted R2 to sing the ABCs. And R2 can't talk. And they said, well, we were going to use a synthesizer to make, noises that sounded sort of somewhere between R2's beeps and letters like A, B, that kind of thing. And I said, no, if he could make letter sounds, he can put them together into words, he could talk. R2 can't talk. So we reworked that script into having 3PO and the Sesame Street cast sing it, and R2 dances around and beeps. But it suddenly occurred to me a week or so before we were all going to be in New York, did Tony need a visa to come do this show? And yes, he needed a visa because he was going to be working, and it's kind of hard to hide the fact that you're on a TV show. So I tried to figure, I called around, tried to figure out how we could get one. The State Department was like, no, it takes 6 weeks to get a visa. And I had a week. And so to try and make a long story at least shorter, I ended up calling one of our California senators and asked him to get involved. And he gave me the name of someone at immigration to call, who was like, well, he's an actor wearing a mask. We have a policy, if there's an actor wearing a mask, there's no reason to bring someone in from another country. You could hire an American actor to do it. I said, the costume is molded to his body. It's one of the children of the world's favorite characters to appear on the world's favorite children's show in what the UN has declared the International Year of the Child. Can you cut through the red tape and get me this visa? It's like, oh, I don't know. And then I said, Senator Cranston said you could take care of it. He said, let me put you on hold for a minute. Went away, came back, said, if you can get someone here by the end of the day today, we can get you a visa and, you know, we can have a visa signed off, but you need someone in authority from either Lucasfilm or Children's Television Workshop to sign for it. So I called the general counsel, the senior attorney for Children's Television Workshop, and said, I just noticed that no one from CTW has gotten Tony a visa. And he was like, oh my God. I said, don't worry, I've solved it, but someone from your office needs to go here and sign for it today. And so they sent, because they were in New York, I was in Los Angeles. So they went off and signed for it. And the next week, Tony, we had a car pick Tony up. It drove him to the American Embassy in London, where he was handed his visa. They drove on to Heathrow, I guess, and flew into New York, where my crew flew in from LA, and we all met up at our hotel and had dinner together that night, and then went and shot Sesame Street the next day.
That's a wonderful story. And, you know, you're so right. You know, the stars aligned to have everything that was important to children at that time. Star Wars, Sesame Street, you know, just, you know, to work. And so that's an incredible story. And I'm sure, you know, your work, you know, led to the success of that particular series. So, but I heard a rumor as well that Jimmy Carter's daughter was a big Star Wars fan as well.
Oh yes, Jimmy Carter's daughter was a big Star Wars fan, and I'd actually thought of calling her before calling Alan Cranston, but realized there isn't like a phone number you can call for president's daughter, unlike senators have offices. And even if I did reach her, and I just remembered her name is Amy Carter, she would then have to go talk to someone else about it. And that was too many steps. So that's why I went over to Cranston to get it. And at the time, he was one of the like 5 most powerful members of the Senate. So he was a very senior politician. So his name carried a lot of weight.
That's wonderful. So, Craig, a couple of more questions before we curate some of the questions that we've had through from our members. I just wanted to kind of talk about your work with the official Star Wars fan club. Mm-hmm. So in March 1978, you personally edited and issued Bantha Tracks, which was the first Star Wars fan club newsletter. I
actually wrote the magazine actually just says edited by, but I actually wrote all but I think one article in the first 3 years of Bantha Tracks.
Got it. And so, you know, I remember seeing a feature, and I'm going to actually share this in a second. I remember seeing a feature in a magazine. I think I was young and in the dentist's waiting room or something, and saw this little kind of feature, if you like, in a magazine. And so how popular, you know, when that was first publicized as a fan club, how popular was that? You know, what was the kind of interest in joining at that time, you know, back in March 1978?
Well, I don't have any specific numbers, but I know we were getting more signups than we expected. So it was very popular. Originally, the fulfillment, the actual mailing out of the membership kit was done by one of our licensees, Factors, etc. but we provided all of the content and all of the material in the membership kit. There was a poster that Ralph McQuarrie painted that I designed that was just to members of the fan club, photos, a book cover, an embroidered patch. You have the embroidered patch over your shoulder there. And a bunch of other things. Later, we added pencils with Empire Strikes Back on the pencils and pictures of the characters. Yeah, that's part of it. The triangle patch or the triangle sticker, the photo of Mark, the membership card.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, as I was talking to you a little earlier on, being a child in the UK and seeing that little, strip, if you like, in the middle of a magazine, and then begging my parents somehow to raise $5. How on earth? I can't even remember how we got $5 and sent it away. But I remember receiving this through the mail. I had a force number, I had a patch, I had a great photograph of Mark Hamill, and at the time, the Ralph McQuarrie, kind of triangle sticker, if you like. And I remember we were talking about earlier on. There was a description as to what it was,
Yep.
and how it was relevant. And I can't even think about these days, having to explain that. But it was just such a wonderful memory of receiving, and the excitement of receiving that through the mail at the time as a child was just indescribable.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I was in my early 20s when I was at Lucasfilm. And so I wasn't that much older than our average member. And I was really designing the items we gave away in the membership kit, and the content of the newsletter was not what I thought I would want to hear about, what I would want to read about if I was a fan out there. If I was 8 years old, if I was 15 years old, most of our members were in that kind of age range. And so I wasn't, I was deliberately trying to not talk down to anyone, to be informative, but in easily understood language. And I guess that's the welcome to the fan club letter, which my name is on the bottom of somewhere. I can't quite make it out, but.
Absolutely. Again, I think, the buzz that, creating the Bantha tracks and reading through, the various newsletters. And then I think, I can't remember which, whether it was 2 or 3, to hear about the second movie coming along, and a lot of the rumors around that. So I hopefully have done my research right. Is it true that George Lucas approached you about some of the things you were writing in Bantha tracks and said, you need to make up a few more rumors, you need to confuse people a little bit more?
You've confused two different things, but
okay.
We'd worked a lot on Star Wars with the people at Starlog magazine, and I wanted to do something for them. So at the end of 1979, before any other stories had appeared anywhere, I provided them with some photos in the ice cave. And we were still so early, we didn't want to release any real information. So they ran an article about rumors about what will be in Empire Strikes Back. And it was a 2-page article. And I actually wrote the article, even though the editor of the magazine's name is on it. We said, let's do this. And they were happy to do it because it's kind of a cool article, and it got them photos before anyone else in the world was publishing photos. And I showed the draft of the article to George, and he said, that's great, but there should be more rumors. Why don't you make up some rumors for it? I said, George, I made up all of these rumors. I wrote the article. He said, make up more. So the article that appeared in the magazine is actually my original article with the photographs and a sidebar that says, we showed this article to Craig Miller at Lucasfilm, and asked for his comment. And his comments were, and what I said in the sidebar, which I also wrote, was, well, those are indeed rumors, and some of them are true and some of them aren't, but I won't tell you which is which. And by the way, here are more rumors that you could pick for yourself as to what's the truth. Because the whole purpose, I mean, part of the purpose was George wanted to confuse people as to what's going on, because there were rumors out there, some of which were true, as to what was going on in Empire, and he wanted to be as much of a surprise as possible. So it played into our desire to confuse people as to exactly what to expect, but it also promoted the film. It got people talking. It did something for Starlog to get them a scoop on any other publication in the world. So that's what we did. But that wasn't in Bantha Tracks. That was in Starlog.
Got it. Yeah. You know, it's funny. I think even to this day, you know, the rumors and counter rumors around Empire Strikes Back, you know, as a child, I wouldn't have known about it. But back then, there was a lot of publicity in the papers about who's related to who, what the plot would be, and what the ending would be. And, you know, I think to this day, it's still testament to that movie, you know, being, for me, not just the greatest Star Wars movie, but one of the greatest movies of all time. You know, for the you know, the Luke Skywalker Darth Vader scene, you know, where he announces that he's his father. To this day, you see children's jaws drop when they watch that movie. So yeah. I can imagine exactly why that remake was the way it was. So so yeah, that's a great memory of that. So Craig, before we jump into some questions from our members, I have one last thing I want to run through, and we're going to have some fun in a little while with true and false questions, which we talked about a little earlier on. You know, I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that I saw Craig at Empire Con, and, you know, for you to speak there, and I was enthralled by what you had to say, and as part of our Force Fest collaboration as well. And I personally, you know, after hearing what you had to say, found out that you'd written a book, a memoir, if you like, yes. Of your work, you know, and your career with Lucasfilm, and it's called, you know, Star Wars Memories: My Time in the Death Star Trenches. I've read this book. I wouldn't even consider it to be anything than just a wonderful anecdotal journey through your work. I'm going to encourage everybody, every member, to try and acquire a copy of this. Buy it, read it. It is unique. It is no other book like it out there. I think it's a fantastic personal memoir, if you like, as the title says, of your time in your career. And I'm not going to give anything away from this book because I think it's such a wonderful read. And, you know, I was delighted to have read it, and just it's in my collection, and I think it's just a wonderful work of you know, of your time. And you know, one of the things I want to say real quick, I'd love to see you write another book about some of your work or other things that in your career.
I'm actually right now working on a biography of Gary Kurtz.
That would be amazing. And you know, one of the things I loved about not just, you know, the book and the content and your personal memories, I love the foreword by Gary Kurtz. You know, I don't know. I'm kind of surmising. I think that, you know, I think it jumps out from the pages that you were quite close with Gary. You had a really good working professional relationship, personal relationship with Gary.
Yeah, I met him on Star Wars, and we became friends, and I've worked with him. He's, of course, gone now. Off and on through 40 years on all of his movies since Star Wars, Return to Oz, The Dark Crystal, Slipstream, and a lot of other projects. We were working on a film in development at the time of his death. So,
yeah. So anyway, this book is available on, I think it's Amazon, and I think in Barnes & Noble, and I think you can buy it for Kindle as well. So I've read this book. It is amazing. Treat yourself. Buy yourself an early Christmas present. this book. It is absolutely amazing. It is nothing like I've ever read before. You get some books I've written about what it was like to be on set. This is just a personal memoir. And, thank you for writing it. It's just a really, really cool personal story. Okay, with that being said, David, do we have some questions from our members that you'd like to
So
ask?
I'm going to take the opportunity to ask the first question for myself. I am the resident kind of toy guy here in the group, and you mentioned the importance of the merchandising and the marketing of Star Wars. And what I want to ask you is more about the later part of your career when you were writing for television shows, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, The Real Ghostbusters, others, presumably Smurfs, that were geared toward just the storyline, I assume, was to market toys. What was the process for kind of that?
Well, okay, so I've written for the last 30 years, I've been writing television, and most of it's been animation. And the ones that were heavily sponsored, in the industry, we call them toy shows or toy-driven shows, like a G.I. Joe, where they're on the air because of the toy company, and only as long as the toy company wants them to be on. The toy company has a lot of overall approval, and they've been involved heavily in the early stages when you're developing the general concept of the show and who the characters are and what the characters and the vehicles and such can do and can't do. Mostly they aren't involved in well, it depended. Some shows they were deeply involved in improving every story, and others they were, as long as it was fine, it was fine, kind of thing. But we were really just, we have a setup, G.I. Joe, who the characters are, what they are, the real Ghostbusters. And the writers are coming up with story ideas. And we pitch story ideas to the story editor, who's effectively the head writer on the shows. And they run them past the producers and anyone. Sometimes they're people from the network, sometimes they're people from the toy company who get involved and have to approve first the idea, then the outline for the script, and then the final script. And it's sort of, you have to know what is appropriate to put into these kinds of shows, what's not appropriate. You can't have, and it's just like, that you can't have a character kill someone. G.I. Joe, the bad guy's plane crashed and we have a shot of them getting out after it crashed, or parachuting out before it crashed, because no one can die. So you just know what you can and can't do. But our object as the writers is to tell a good story while staying true to whatever the show is or what the toys are. I mean, throughout television, you don't suddenly have one of your, Lassie doesn't suddenly bite Timmy. They have to be true to the setup of the characters. And television is something you invite into your home every day, every week, to see these same characters again. So it's all about characters. It's all about telling stories about these characters and what we want to know about them. So the toys are a restriction, but in any kind of art, the restrictions help you be more imaginative to tell good stories, because they've got to be good stories to start with. If they're not, it doesn't matter.
And they absolutely were, and have influenced my purchasing power to this day with the reissues and that sort of thing coming out there. I
remember one time the toy company people showed up with these new vehicles, And we were looking at them, and I remember saying, can this vehicle do this? And the toy company guy went, yeah, sure, have it do that. And so, they were reasonably open to things. But one of the things they always wanted was, if something can transform or something has an ability, make sure you show that in every episode. And make sure all the characters who are toys appear in every episode, because they're very worried if they aren't there, kids will forget about them.
Yes, very important, because you were a writer on Beast Wars as well, Transformers.
Beast Wars. Yeah.
Excellent. Question from our member Scooby. It's like, you're being a part of Star Wars is amazing. And he's fascinated with the sense of comradeship built by creating something so beloved. He'd like you to speak to relationships you cherish with people or with your time working with the Star Wars related projects.
Well, okay. I mean, yes, we all formed relationships. I became friendly with a lot of people. I had lunch with Harrison here in LA. When we were in England on the show, Mark Hamill invited my assistant, Mark Marshall, and I over to his house. He and Mary Lou barbecued hamburgers, probably the only barbecue in Chelsea in London at that time. So we were all friendly. These relationships don't necessarily stay, constant to this day. I mean, Mark and I still know each other, but we don't hang out. Mark Marshall, I'm still friendly with. Mark went on to a career. He was a production supervisor on some of the Harry Potter movies and all kinds of things. But a lot of it is still friendly, still relationships from that time. I mean, I've worked on a lot of movies over the years. Some were jobs and some were much more meaningful parts of my life. I met my wife working on Empire Strikes Back.
Wonderful.
She, we were both at a convention in Chicago. I was there to do a slideshow about Empire. She was attending from New York as a fan. She'd come out with some other fans. We met there. I was in New York 3 weeks later doing Sesame Street. I called her up. We went to dinner, and that started a relationship. We've just had our 35th wedding anniversary.
Very nice.
So that's pretty meaningful.
I think
life-changing.
And I think that all of us can relate to that entirely, because the members of this group are from all over the country and all over the world, and we have those kind of relationships. It's not constant. We don't, always get to see each other. We understand you. We feel you.
And I have a lot of friends, writers and artists, but just science fiction fans who, have their librarians or their computer programmers or their doctors that I've known for 30, 40, going on 50 years through the science fiction world. And so, all those relationships come from all of this. It's, we stay in touch, stay together as best we can these days.
Yeah. As George Lucas would say, it's family.
Yeah,
exactly.
One big family.
All right. I think last question before I let Jonathan get into his things here is back about the 1-800 numbers. Is the member thinking, well, they had never heard of that being done for a movie before. Did your group kind of invent that concept?
I invented that. 800 numbers were kind of new. They'd only been around for a few years. And telephone answering machines had only been around for a few years. This was in the, we're talking about the late 70s. And you could call a phone number in LA, probably in lots of other places, and hear a listing of what movies were playing where. And not just you call the theater, well, you could call the theater and get the listings of what was playing at that theater, but there was also a phone number, movie phone, where you could call up and get all kinds of movies. And that gave me the idea, maybe we could do this with messages from Star Wars. And so I ran it past George and he said, sure. I wrote all the scripts. He approved all the scripts. And we were still doing the looping for Empire. So when all the actors, when each of them came in to record their dialogue, we would record their 800 message, except for Harrison. This is from me and George from the after party from screening Empire for the Lucasfilm company in LA. Harrison had already recorded his looping session. So I took a sound man friend of mine up to Harrison's house and we recorded him there. But otherwise, they were all part of the looping. We did them all. They got edited appropriately and became available, as I say, in mid-January.
Very cool. And our member Mike has posted the links to those on YouTube in the Facebook chat. So
great.
Anyone desiring to hear those in their entirety, right there. So I think that's wrapping up what we've got here for now, Jonathan. So
thank you, David. So before we finish up, Craig, we're gonna have a little bit of fun. Okay. We're gonna have a couple of true or false questions. Now, I'm gonna give you one time ability to say maybe, okay? But we're looking for true or falses, okay?
You've heard me answer questions. Do you think I can answer a question in one word?
Well, you can say true or false and maybe give an explanation. But if there's one that you're not sure about, you could use a maybe.
Okay.
Okay. So true or false? Is it true or false that you actually played video arcade games with Steven Spielberg?
True.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Oh, well, you said one word.
I want to know which one.
Asteroids. When Steven was getting ready to do Raiders of the Lost Ark, we set up some offices in the Lucasfilm building, the egg company, for his team. And in the lobby area of the Spielberg section, it had its own little lobby that went into a corridor that their offices were off of. We set up a couple of games. Asteroids was one, and I can't remember what the other one was. It was a commercial game of the period, and I just don't remember because I was an Asteroids guy, so I always played Asteroids. And it was really there for Steven, because Steven would get bored and want to leave, and George wanted him to stay. So he said, well, he put in these games, and anyway, they're mostly for Steven and to play, but any of us were allowed to play them. There was no restriction on it. And one day I was playing a couple games of Asteroid, and Steven's assistant came out and said, you should get off the machine. Steven wants to play. And I said, I'm not very good at this. I'll be dead in a minute. I'll be off of it before he gets here. No, you should get off the machine. Steven wants to play. I said, don't worry, I'll be off of it. It'll be okay. And then Steven came out and said, I'll get off. And he said, no, you want to play? And so we played a couple games of Asteroids.
That's a great story. Okay, next question, true or false? And I can relate to this, actually. With the limited palette of some of the British crew, and I don't know which movie, whether it was Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back. I'm thinking Empire Strikes Back. Is it true that Carrie Fisher introduced some of the British crew to tacos?
Tacos, yes. It was Empire. It was Carrie's because you didn't have tacos in London during Star Wars. There was one restaurant in London that served Mexican food that opened during production on Empire. And the crew loved Carrie. Carrie loved the crew. They got along famously. And on her last day, she threw a catered meal for the crew to thank them. And she had the Mexican place cater it. And it was a complete mystery to the British crew. I mean, British tastes at the time were very, very parochial. And Mexican food, why would there even be Mexican food in London? So they were just completely mystified. And I really remember distinctly one of the crew, because they all had little signs on them as to what they were and stuff, going, tacos? What is a taco? But so they were introduced by Carrie to the crew.
That's wonderful. And my last question, and you actually alluded to it. Now, you mentioned earlier on that Mark Hamill actually barbecued some burgers for you. Does Mark Hamill make a good burger? True or false?
Better than Wimpy's. They were good burgers. They weren't anything, weird or elaborate or anything. They were just good old American barbecued hamburgers using British beef. Wasn't having it flown in. No, they were perfectly fine. I don't particularly remember them as being special. It was more special hanging out with Mark and Mary Lou than the actual food, and seeing a barbecue grill in a backyard in London was quite unusual back then.
Got it. That's wonderful. So just as we wrap up this evening's conversation, I just want to say again, for our members out there, if you love these kind of stories, these little anecdotes, as we've just been chatting about in the true or false section of this conversation, buy Craig's book. It's amazing. It's so, so great. These little stories and snippets and anecdotes of Craig's time with Lucasfilm. It's a perfect read for you.
Thank you. I did my best to tell stories that you haven't read anywhere else.
That's very true.
They're not the same stories over again.
And a little tidbit from the book that I'm going to allude to try and entice you to buy it. I loved reading about Craig's lunch meeting with Harrison Ford in LA. You've got to read about that. That is something I've never heard about before. So that's something that I think everybody will enjoy reading. Anyway, Craig, thank you so much for spending a lot of time with us this evening, sharing your memories, answering our questions, getting to know us a little bit better, us getting to know you a little bit better.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for you're welcome. And again, I hope everybody's enjoyed Craig's presentation this evening and getting to know him a little bit better and his time with the Star Wars movies. So with that, I'll turn it over to David to talk about some of the things that's coming up over the next week or two.
Well, thank you very much again, Craig. And your stories and Jonathan's pitches have worked. Several of our members have commented that they've bought your book online during the show tonight.
Oh, great.
So, and are looking forward to getting it in and reading that. So, but yes, if you have enjoyed tonight's presentation and you came in a little late and you missed the early part, this will be archived nearly immediately on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/The Virtual Cantina Network. We have a whole playlist for our speaker series, and this will go right there. Also, the rest of this week, join us again tomorrow night, December 1st, for our finale of the speaker series, where we will have Mr. Paul Hirsch will be here. And then join us again on Thursday night, where we will continue our countdown to the Book of Boba Fett. watching Boba Fett's arc as it develops through the movies and the Mandalorian TV series. We're going to be watching Return of the Jedi with special guest Kevin Thompson, who will be telling us stories about the making of that movie and all things going on there. So that's what's coming up. That's a full week this week. Lots of shows, lots of good content, and we've started it off really well here with this tonight.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. So with that being said, just want to wrap it up and say thank you, Craig, for making so many children's dreams come true with everything that you did in connecting the fans with the movies, you know, with the Star Wars fan club and everything you did with the Sesame Street series. You certainly brought me closer to the movies as an 8 or a 9-year-old living in a backwater town in the UK, and you know, wanting to experience and be closer to the movie. So thank you for that. You know, your work there is just huge and commendable. And thank you for doing that. So with that, we'll close out this evening. Thank you again, Craig, and we will see you tomorrow night for the last of the speaker series, which is Paul Hirsch. We look forward to meeting Paul tomorrow night. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. May the Force be with you.
Thank you.